Are you an amateur athlete who is sick and tired of repeatedly tearing your hamstring during training or competition? Well, you are not alone. This is actually a common scenario amongst athletes, especially if you're an athlete who is exposed to sports that require high-speed running and sprinting. I've been doing a little bit of sifting through some videos on YouTube, and the problem with a lot of these videos is that they often give you exercises in rehab to get your hamstring strong again, but what they don't do is tell you how to stop this frustrating process of recurrent hamstring injuries. And what I'm going to show you today is how you can focus on just stopping getting these recurrent hamstrings happening to you in the first place. Because having a hamstring strain is really frustrating, but having recurrent hamstring strains is even worse. It just ruins your confidence in your ability to actually sprint. Hamstring strains are a super common injury amongst athletes, okay? Especially those who are required to sprint and accelerate and decelerate very quickly. However, I don't want to just sit here and say that it's normal, because it shouldn't be considered a normal thing to happen. It's something that happens due to a mismatch between the hamstring's level of preparedness and what it's actually being exposed to. And the biggest thing is it's usually not because your hamstring is weak. So what does your hamstring actually have to deal with? It needs to deal with high forces at high speeds. These are things like your max effort sprinting, your acceleration and deceleration forces as well. These are all considered high stresses and something that places the hamstring at risk. And you can be really strong in the gym, like you can have a massive squat, a massive deadlift, but those things are not going to prepare your hamstring for high levels of speed exposure. And this is where we get to the point of like the speed exposure and strength gap that's going on here. Most people who are in rehab will focus on doing their strength exercises, they'll focus on their activation drills, they'll focus on doing mobility drills, but they never actually focus on the step-by-step process that's necessary to get them back to high-speed running. And they have this gap here where they've done a lot of strength work, but not a lot of speed work, and then they ramp themselves right back into high-speed running way too quickly, and that issue comes back again as a recurring hamstring strain. So ultimately your hammy gets stronger, but it's not prepared for speed. And so your current predicament probably looks something along the lines of: you tear your hamstring, you rest and you do your rehab, your pain settles and your injury heals and you start to feel good again. You return to running, you eventually reintroduce speed, and then soon after you reintroduce that speed, your hamstring goes on you again. And the major mistake during this process is that when you're returning to running, you focus on increasing your running distance and volume, but you're doing that at the expense of things like maximum intensity and speed. And you need to expose yourself to higher speeds so that your hamstring can adapt and build some tolerance to that work. But the problem is when you miss out on that and then you eventually do return to high speed work, that loading spikes dramatically and then you're suddenly at high risk again. This is a problem because sprinting puts such a load on the hamstring. And if you don't progressively load this, that hamstring is going to be the weakest link in the chain. And then your first true max effort sprint is going to be enough overload for you. But usually in rehab, we're not just prescribing one max effort sprint. It's usually going to look more like sort of 2, 3, 4, 5, even multiple more efforts than that. And that's often way too much when you're exposing yourself to high levels of speed early on. And there's other contributing issues to avoid in this process, and this includes only going hard when you're feeling good. The problem with this is when you're feeling good and you want to go hard, your confidence is super high, and when your confidence is high, that max effort gets even higher. And this can put you at risk, especially if you haven't had a lot of speed exposure prior to doing so. Next thing is being scared to actually sprint. If you are someone who's had recurrent hamstring strains, this is going to be a massive issue for you, because you know that if you sprint, you're at risk of tearing a hammy, and you just don't want to have to go through that process over and over and over again. So being scared to actually sprint is a real issue. The problem with being scared to sprint is if you wait too long to actually start sprinting, you're just continuing to decondition to that stimulus of high-speed running. And if you jump straight back into it without appropriate exposure along the way, you're going to be at risk. The thing about being scared to sprint because you're going to pull a hammy is like being scared of deadlifting because you think you're going to hurt your back. This last one is my biggest pet peeve amongst the athlete population, and it's inconsistent exposure to sprinting. If you're someone who's coming to see me about a recurrent hamstring strain, I can almost guarantee that it's probably because you have inconsistent exposure to high speed work. And this is a really big one for team sport athletes, okay? If you're a team sport athlete who has to sprint, accelerate, decelerate, any of those stresses, you're probably just not exposing yourself enough to those stresses. This is an even bigger issue in the off-season period because you play a full season and then you have this rest for a couple of months afterwards. But during that couple of months, I highly doubt you're doing any max effort sprinting whatsoever. And then after that couple of months, you get back to pre-season. Yeah, you might ease your way into some pre-season drills and running, but usually that running isn't like max effort sprint running. It's mostly conditioning that's trying to get your general fitness back up. And then when you do start sprinting, you've had this really long gap of probably like 3 or 4 months, and then you're suddenly hitting max speeds again. And there's a really crucial mindset shift that needs to be made here, especially if you're someone who lacks the confidence to actually go out and sprint. And that mindset shift is you need to go from being, why do I keep pulling my hammy, to I just haven't built the tolerance that's necessary for high speed running yet. So how can you progress back into high speed running or sprinting again whilst minimizing your risk of re-injury? Well, number one is you need to slowly reintroduce speed work. And one of my favorite ways to do that is just through some controlled tempo running. So you might set up a couple of cones that are like 50 meters apart, and then you're gradually just going to start building up some speed through different levels of intensity. So you could simply start with like a 60 to 70% of top speed exposure, which really isn't that fast. But if you're not someone who's used to running relatively fast on the regular, it's probably going to be enough exposure to start. And then you just, gradually trying to build your speed, but you're also trying to build your confidence and know that you can handle it. You don't have to be going out there and hitting 90% straight away, because even at 90%, your hamstring's copping a lot of force at high speed. And if you're not used to it, it does risk a strain while you're simply trying to rebuild yourself. Confidence is one of the biggest things here, especially in those with recurrent hamstring injuries. And these tempo runs are awesome because they're going to build up some good exposure to speed work over time, and it's going to give you a good foundation to sprint fast. You need to also be aware that you need more than just gym strength training, and you need more than just running for distance. You need to be exposed to velocity and intensity. They're the things that are going to help get your hamstring more tolerant to doing high speed running. You need to remember that speed has to be progressed just like you progress anything else, whether that's your long distance running or your gym strength work. The things you need to keep track of to support a return to high speed sprinting without the fear of a recurrent strain is, how fast are my efforts feeling? How are you pulling up the next day? And how are my confidence levels with my current speed programming feeling? If you keep track of all these things, it gives you some objective data to appropriately progress yourself back to consistent high speed running. The thing with sprinting in particular is that you can't just avoid it, because if you play a sport that requires it, avoiding it's just going to keep you at risk. You need to earn the right to own it. If you're an athlete who keeps having setbacks with recurrent hamstring strains, these tips in this video should help you get back and stop these recurrent hamstring strains for good. And if you've been in this boat of recurrent hamstring strains for a while, then you're probably going to be someone who overthinks their rehab a bit. And to help you with that, I have a video right here that you should click on and go and watch and learn how to stop overthinking your rehab.